Shalom, dear friends. Many who are first will be last, and the last will be first. This is how we concluded chapter 19 yesterday. And the parable in chapter 20 explains this floating proverb that is often tagged to different sections of the Gospels. We have the story, the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. The owner of the vineyard hires different sets of laborers at different time. At 6 a.m., at 9 a.m., 12 noon, 3 p.m. and again finally at 5 p.m. To the first batch of laborers, the owner had agreed 1 denarius as wage, which is the usual daily wage. And for the rest, he would pay according to what is just. The last are paid first, the 1 denarius. Then it is surprising for those who were called first because they too were paid just 1 denarius each. The generosity of the owner and the equal treatment made them grumble. And look at the statement, you have made them equal to us. The message is, the kingdom of heaven does not operate on the basis of economic convention. Here, God rules by grace, not by commercial convention. The reward, which appears constantly in the Gospel according to Matthew, are not earned, but they are given as grace by God. The owner, who is the figure of God, represents God who is generous with people who need God's grace. In the case of the story, 1 denarius is bare minimum to feed the family. So the laborers who came at 5 p.m. also need that 1 denarius for the sustenance of the family. God, in His bounty and His mercy, gives enough material for the sustenance of even the last laborer. So in God's realm, all are fed as a sign of God's inclusive love. Maybe for the community in Matthew, the tax collectors and sinners and the Gentiles who joined the Christian community also had the same share as those of the Jewish Christians who occupied the membership of the community at an earlier stage. Matthew also tells us that envy is the most destructive factor in a Christian community. We come to the next topic, a theme which is very prominent in Matthew, a blindness motive. The apostles who have been with Jesus for a long time failed to see in Jesus often the divinity, and they fail in their understanding of discipleship. Disciples who have been with Jesus for 3 years are blind to what Jesus has been teaching them. So there is a request from the mother of James and John to Jesus. And this comes, unfortunately, after the sober prediction regarding the crucifixion and death and the resurrection of Jesus. And it is jarring to note that the disciples are bickering over places of honor. Now, soon after the first passion announcement, Peter misunderstood the identity of Jesus, and Jesus reprimanded Peter by saying, "You are a stumbling block, get away from me." because your mind is set on human things. Now, in the third and the final prediction, we have these two other disciples, James and John, who form part of the inner cycle of the disciples together with Peter. They too are blind to this understanding of discipleship. And these three, Peter, John, and James, represent the group of the disciples who do not really understand Jesus. The cup that is mentioned here in the Old Testament stands for suffering, rejection, and even death. So Jesus tells them that they will have to share the cup of suffering. Jesus makes use of this as a classroom to instruct them on leadership, servant leadership. Whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant. Just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Ransom, a Greek word lutros, used only twice in the Old Testament. First, the way God liberated Israel from Egypt. Secondly, the way God liberated Israel during the exile in Babylon. And the Son of Man is giving his life as a ransom. It's not just any money. And for many, in the Semitic language, polis, many, stands for all. That is why in the Latin rite of the Eucharistic liturgy, while raising the cup, this cup will be poured out for you and for many. It means actually for all. Finally, we come to the last healing story in the Gospel according to Matthew, the healing of two blind men. After having instructed the disciples on servant leadership, Jesus has reached Jericho, and there he demonstrates the kind of leader that he is. How the descendant of David shows compassion to those in need. And the two blind men represent the real followers of Jesus. They are physically blind, but there's a threefold addressing of Jesus as Kyrie, Lord. Kyrie eleison, have mercy on us. 3 times. The perfect believer. And they also address Jesus as Son of David. James, Peter, and John, the other disciples, proved that they are blind to the teachings of Jesus. And these two physically blind men recognize the divinity of Jesus, and Jesus touches them and heals them. And this healing story turns out to be a discipleship story, because finally it is said they regained their sight and followed him. With chapter 21 tomorrow, we enter into the last week of Jesus' life as he enters triumphantly into Jerusalem. God bless you.